Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I wanted to invite you to the first of 4 webinars we'll be hosting and moderating regarding the housing crisis in the nation, in Maine and in Southern Maine particularly. Today's topic, we'll be talking about the intro to the housing crisis. We have several wonderful speakers, all located here in Southern Maine. And we'll be going through, starting with Tom Emerson. But as a quick intro, my name is Amber Harrison. I am the Housing Innovation Manager for York Community Service Association and the local health officer for the town of York. I work in conjunction YCSA and Fairtide on a housing navigator program through the Maine Housing. And we are going to be hosting these webinars again each month through September, and we'll have them recorded, and we invite folks to submit questions beforehand if possible, so we can get your questions about housing answered for the community. We will be starting today with Tom Emerson, who is a local architect here in Maine. He is the principal at Studio B Architecture and is also very involved in advocacy for affordable housing in Maine, and is on the Economic Development Committee in Kittery, as well as been a planning board member and a comprehensive plan committee member. And we appreciate your time this morning, Tom, to talk about the housing crisis in general and the history of how we got here. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure, glad to. I should probably add, I'm also on the housing committee in Kittery, and on what we call CLIC, the Kittery Land Issues Committee, which is where we initiate zoning change of all kinds, but often in support of the housing initiatives that we've been working on pretty intensively for the last couple of years, and Kendra will, I'm sure, fill us in on later. I think the place to start in the discussion is, what is affordable housing? I get asked that all the time, and people have their own particular narratives around what it should be. But the definition for this has been around for 80 years. It comes out of the 1930s. It is a household spending no more than 30% of their gross income on their housing needs. So for rentals, that would be your rental costs, your utilities, perhaps some fees. In an ownership model, that would be your mortgage, your taxes, your various fees associated with your mortgage and your utilities. You'll notice that's not a single number. People usually want to put a single number to what is affordable. Affordability is a sliding scale that depends on your own particular situation and where you're located. So clearly, affordable housing is one thing in Hale County, Alabama, and a whole different thing in San Jose, California. So we generally look at things from a percentage of the area median household income. And that percentage is usually something, affordability starts at a number that's usually around 80%. I know that York just creates a distinction between affordability and low income. There's a lot of semantics involved in the affordable housing discussion, and we different communities view things different ways. Some places don't like to refer to something as low income, but until you'll hear terms like workforce and that sort of thing. But affordable housing generally starts at 80% of the area median household income, and that's median. That's not average. That means that half the people make more and half the people make less. For Southern York County, the area median household income is $124,300, most recent numbers. So 80% of that would be where you start. And then there's various categories. There's low income, there's very low income, moderately low income. And those are also seen as percentages, usually 60, 40, sometimes 50%. And I'm sure when Eric talks about the various programs that Maine Housing does, the requirements for those housing types of assistances are usually based on some percentage, depending on the program. So how did we get here? The main thing to understand is that affordable housing is an issue worldwide. It is especially acute in the United States, and it's especially acute in areas not unlike Southern York County, where incomes are high, property values are high. construction is expensive. So, you know, the issues here are a little bit different than they are somewhere else, and therefore the need for affordable housing is greater. If you look back at it historically, in the wake of World War II, when everyone knew there was going to be a massive housing crisis, when the pent up demand from the Depression, there was not a whole lot of household formation in the 1930s. Then you have all the soldiers returning from World War II. The government on all levels understood that we were going to have the need for a massive increase in housing. And so you have all different kinds of programs that were created, but we essentially created suburbia as a response to the need for massive amounts of housing. We built like crazy for 25 years, and the baby boom that resulted was roughly 77 million people. We haven't done the same thing for the resulting millennial generational cohort, which is the same size or maybe even bigger than the baby boom that were their parents. We had the dot-com bust of the late 90s. We had the recession of the early 2000s. We simply have not built enough housing, enough of the right kinds of housing, and enough housing in the right locations to support what might be the largest generational cohort in American history. There are various reasons for this. Everything from the cost of construction, the fact that people now see their communities as kind of put under glass, set in amber from the time that they're built, and they don't look at incremental growth as part of the nature of the communities that they grew up in. The population growth is massive. I mean, we're more than double what we were when I was born in 1960. So, then the question gets to be, well, how much housing should we be building in our communities? And recognizing the enormity of the problem is essential to understanding it. Even as on a conservative basis, this country is short $3.8 million homes. I used that number. I used it down at Congress for the New Urbanism last week. I got a lot of pushback from people who think that number is way too conservative, that the number is much higher. There's nearly the need for 1 million homes in California alone. But that's a safe conservative number that you can fall back on, and there's various places that have worked with a number around that size. There are 140 million homes in the United States. If you do the math, and I've done it for Kittery. Kittery has 4,962 units. You divide that into 140 million, and you get 0.00003544. You take that number and you multiply it by the number of units in Kittery. We're short 1,300 units out of that 3.8 million. So 1,300 is a lot in a community with only 4,900 units. You look at what the affordable number is. Maine Housing and the National Low Income Housing Coalition estimate that the number in Maine is somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000. There are 746,000 units in Maine. Again, do the math as a percentage. We're probably 150 affordable units short of where we need to be. So this is an enormous problem. If you look at the fact that Kittery, where we have, or Southern New York County, where we have a massive employment base relative to someplace like Aroostook County, a 10,000 population, someplace like Presque Isle, they don't have 13,000 jobs. We do. So those numbers I've given you are conservative. We probably need more to support the fact that we have a higher level of employment. There's a friend of mine, client of mine, who was in the auto repair business, and Kittery actually lived in New York, and all of his employees came in from Sanford or Somersworth or Rochester or someplace like that, driving 45 minutes. And he would point out that there's a lot of places to fix cars between Sanford and Kittery. The same thing happens with the shipyard. More people who work at the shipyard live in Sanford and Somersworth and Rochester than live in Kittery. So we have this small Maine town of 10,000 people has traffic jams twice a day. And that's the result of the housing not matching the employment in the community. So that's sort of kind of where we are, how we got there. One of when we're starting to look at how do we solve the problem, I'd like to address some of the myths that people have around affordable housing. And the first one is we would have all the affordable housing we need if only developers weren't so greedy. Yeah, developers are probably greedy. It is a profit motivated business like many others, but developers build well over 90% of the housing in this country. And if we're going to solve the problem, they have to be part of the solution. And it's not like they've ever been different. So in times where we've had enough housing, developers were probably greedy then. So our current situation is no different than it ever has been. They're not the problem. If you think that's the problem, you won't come to a solution. Particularly here in the Seacoast, people say, "Oh, if we didn't have so many Airbnbs or short-term rentals, we wouldn't have this problem." Well, there's a lot of places that don't have any Airbnbs or short-term rentals out, someplace where people don't go a lot, and they still have affordable housing issues. So that's not the issue. So those are probably the two biggest ones I hear most often. The third one probably is it's going to change. It'll change the nature of our community. It'll change the character of our community. And the short answer is, yeah, probably. If we're going to solve this solution, create a solution to this problem, it's going to require change. When we handled this problem in the 1940s and the 1950s, we created an entirely new housing and development type. We created suburbia to address the problem. We didn't have that before. We created the National Highway Administration. They have highways all over the place. We have a similar problem now, and I don't think it can be solved thinking it's all going to look the same. I'm not advocating for more suburbia at all. I'm advocating to solve the problem the same way our grandparents solved the problem before zoning, before cars, before a lot of other things. They simply built in place. You were allowed to do more with the property that you have. I think, we're working from the ground up is a starting place. And I think that's kind of the way we need to go. Just to kind of encapsulate, we need to understand the enormity of the problem. That's the kind of first thing. We have to create a broad consensus around the fact that this is a problem. You still hear people say, "Well, I'd love to live in Beverly Hills, but I can't afford to. Why don't people just live where they can afford to live?" That's seeing the problem on an individual basis. We need to see the problem on a community-wide basis. The community needs a diversity of housing stock to meet people's needs wherever those needs happen to be. If you don't, if police, fire, educators, people who take care of the trash, whatever, if you don't have places for these people to live, you're going to have a difficult time solving your kind of basic community needs situation. The other thing is that the government has to be a part of the solution, a big part on all levels. The LIHTC program that creates housing has created over 4 million homes in less than 40 years. That's great. That's a national level. We have to be engaged on the state level, which handles a lot of that, and we have to be engaged on the local level. And we have other people that will speak to that, but that's an absolute necessity. We can't solve the problem without those folks. And again, we have to build more, and there's no way around it. The whole missing middle of the housing stock. We build single family residences and we build apartments, and we build them in basically two different places in the community. If 70% or more of the land in your community is dedicated to single family only zoning, that's a problem that needs to change on the local level. We need to be able to do more with where we live. HUD thinks your house is up to 4 units in some level of commercial. If we can establish 4 units as the definition of a house, because that's where the financing comes from, and that's how people lived for generations and millennia before us, that's being able to solve it at the local level. And that's one of the good things about this problem. I can't solve global geopolitical situations. I'm just a guy in Kittery, Maine. But I can help solve the affordable housing situation. I can build an ADU under 2003. I can probably build more than one ADU. I can, we can solve these things. We can start to solve these things on a local level. I think there's 40 people like me who could build an ADU tomorrow in Kittery, but to get a 42-unit built LIHTC funded building, it would take years in Kittery. So part of the solution can start at the ground level. So we're going to have to attack it from the top down and the ground up, and probably several places in the middle, if we're going to solve the enormity of the problem. That's my spiel.
Thank you, Tom. It was very interesting, and I love the history, and I do totally agree. Developers and government working together, state and municipal levels. We'll have both of those speakers in a minute here. And as far as I heard you mention LD 2003, what is your quick thought on the legislature? It feels like there is momentum with legislature right now. Are you feeling that and optimistic about that?
Yeah, I am. In the last year or two, I've started to do some advocacy at the state level. I've helped write some of the legislation that's active in the state right now. When you're in that kind of bubble, the housing advocacy bubble, people have accepted 2003 as a fait accompli, and we go and we move on from there. At the community level, we're not there yet. There's a lot of the guidance for 2003 was a little difficult for communities, and how it gets implemented and what its impacts are on the local level haven't been sorted out. So it's supposed to start in July. I don't know of any communities that are completely ready for that to happen. So that's something that needs to get kind of worked on at the local level. But there are other things coming down the pike that build upon 2003, and they might very well see the light of day in the next legislative session.
Agreed. I like the momentum, the direction it's going, and 100% agree with the variety of community housing options. And that's really one of my goals here at YCSA and Fair Tide, is to show that there are a variety of options that people can do right now, today, on their own property. And hopefully after this discussion, we'll have another webinar talking specifically about how to create those rental opportunities. As you talked about, it can be done in your own yard, hopefully. And
there's a lot of resources out there for people that I know. We're talking about a landlord program with Fair Tide and with you guys. And I'd give a plug for the Incremental Development Alliance that I'm part of as part of the Congress for the New Urbanism. I took their developer boot camp training, and they're all about, what can you do with the smallest amount of means to have the biggest impact. So things like building ADUs, duplexes, and that kind of thing is kind of their bailiwick. So that's another resource that's out there.
Just phenomenal. And to put a plug in for it, I do offer 1-hour consultations with folks from any of our 5 communities of working with to discuss how to create those rental units, whether it be ADUs, ARUs, or duplexes, things like that. So people can go on to YCSA's website and sign up for a free 1-hour consultation on how to use their property to create an ADU. And I can help guide them through that process as well. Thank you so much, Tom. That was great. We're going to jump now to Eric Jorgensen. I have a very quick video I wanted to show. I think Sophie's going to show it real quick on Maine housing. They just had a report that came out.
It's no secret that living in Maine isn't affordable for a lot of people. And this week, Maine Housing released a report to guide for policymakers and potential home buyers.
The Maine Housing Outlook Report for 2023 dives into several industry sectors. One of the topics the report looks into is home ownership. According to the report, the median sale price for a single-family home in Maine was $334,000 last year. That's up 13% compared to 2021, when that median price was $295,000. The Federal Reserve also raised interest rates 7 times in 2022.
The report explains that when interest rates are high, home prices are expected to be flat or fall. But in Maine, there is a low supply of homes for sale, which could contribute to prices rising again in 2023. Maine Housing says there are programs available to help. Its First Home Loan program provides below-market interest rates and down payment assistance. The report also dives into renting and affordable housing, development, home energy costs, and homelessness.
Maine Housing says it will present the full Outlook report to the Maine legislature. You can read it for yourself on our News Center Maine website and app.
Thank you, Sophie. I just wanted to share real quick that a recent report came out from Maine Housing, and I have Eric Jorgensen. He's the Senior Director of Government Relations and Communications at Maine Housing, very experienced former state legislator with more than 25 years of experience in Maine, particularly on this topic. So I'd love to introduce Eric. Welcome to the group. And if you could talk a little bit about Maine Housing's role in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? Everything coming through? Good. Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It was nice to see the video. It's always a surprise when you hear, like, oh my God, a video. What is it going to be? What are they going to tell us about? But that was actually about a project that we did last year, which is looking at the current status of housing in the state and sort of, all the different metrics. And I thought I would touch on that a little bit. During my time here. I thought Tom hit it beautifully, really crushed it in terms of setting it up, in terms of setting up the situation and where we are. The only things I'd add to that, a couple of factors that I think are interesting about Maine that are unique here that I think do factor in. I think the pandemic fundamentally changed the market in Maine in a way that, suddenly people could come here and earn Boston salaries and telecommute, and you sell a house in the inner suburbs of Boston, for example, and everything in Maine is going to be inexpensive unless it's maybe right on the water. So it's like, I think that's one factor that I think is really driving a lot of things that we're seeing right now. Another factor, I think we have a ton of vacant houses, more than almost every other state, because so many people have second homes here. So these aren't just houses that can be turned into full-time year-round housing, but you do hear a lot about Airbnb. And I would agree with Tom that that's not a massive factor in the state, but I do think in places where Airbnb is big, it's big, and it's a big factor in places like Portland, probably in York and Kittery too, I would think at some level. Places where there's resorts, they're having a lot of trouble with that on Mount Desert Island, for example. So that's another factor I think that's interesting. We've also got the phenomenon of new people coming into Maine, the new Mainers who are arriving here. We've had thousands of new people come into the state in the last year. I mean, marking a trend that's been going on, and that's put a lot of pressure on our short-term housing stock. And I can talk a little bit about that. And then I do think we have the long-term problems around zoning that we've touched on. And I know we'll be hearing more about LD 2003. So I'm not going to touch on that, but I can't agree more with the idea that I think we have to do more with what we've got in terms of turning, single family homes into duplexes and ADUs and those sorts of things. They can all make a real difference. So, and I would also say this is, as Tom pointed out, a national problem, not just a local one. And so I think those are all really important factors. I thought what I might do is share a few slides with you, because I did pull a few numbers and some other things that I thought might be of interest. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Is that looking like it's going to work? Okay, I see nodding. Good, that's excellent. All right, so Maine Housing, we're not a state government entity. We're an organization in Augusta. We were created by the legislature to help provide services around housing and financing, but we're a finance agency mostly. And I guess the way I would look at it, our mission is to assist people in obtaining and maintaining quality, affordable housing and services suitable to their housing needs. And just the way to look at us is, we are mostly a bank. That's the way we make our money. That's the way we pay our bills. But so we're a bank. Unlike a state agency, our operations aren't paid for by the state. We issue bonds. We provide financing for first-time homebuyer mortgages, and we underwrite affordable multifamily housing. We also are a program administrator. We get federal funding for various programs that we pass through on behalf of HUD and the U.S. Treasury. Things like LIHEAP, the Low-Income Housing Heating Assistance Program, the ERA program, which you may have heard of, the Rental Assistance Program that happened, Section 8, and other things. And then finally, we serve as a public housing authority. Maine has 25 or so public housing authorities around the state, and they provide vouchers and other things in local communities. But where communities don't have their own public housing authority, we serve in that role. And I'm not going to touch too much on this. Affordable housing, as Tom pointed out, is 30% or less of your income spent on housing costs. And so the way I like to describe that is if you're a teacher making $40,000, 30% of that is $12,000, meaning you can afford $1,000 a month. And not many rents are available at that price right now anywhere in Maine. I did want to give you some information that we pulled for York County and Kittery last year. And I thought that's kind of interesting because this is the Homeownership Affordability Index, and it's sort of showing the trends of how affordable things are. And the idea is you look for you look for zero as the number. So we're going down, and as you go close, or as the numbers go down, it becomes less affordable. And I think that's a very important factor. You see Maine at the top there, York County and Kittery is even less affordable than York County. What I would say there is you can just look, what's driving that here is the median home prices. And you can just see the prices of homes in Kittery, that's the yellow line, they're just going up steadily, but also going the same way in Maine and also in York County. So again, these all play into some of the shortage factors that we've been talking about elsewhere in this presentation. Maine Housing has a bunch of different programs. We really work a lot around helping people buy homes, helping people repair substandard housing if you've got a problem with your roof, or if you're a low-income person and you need to fix your house to make it inhabitable, we can help with that. We also provide work around rental properties. So we do a lot of financing of new property being built. And then finally, we do heating assistance. This is an example of what people, I think, usually think of when they think of affordable housing. This is a multifamily development. This is a 40-unit property that was opened last year in Westbrook. We don't own any apartments, Maine Housing, but we do finance them, and so it's really important to understand that. But these are projects that are available in local towns, and they're hard to build sometimes. They involve a lot of local pushback, and people don't always understand what affordable housing is. It's going to change the character. It's going to attract the wrong kind of people. We've seen some really unfortunate things that are happening around opposition to some of these projects, when in fact what these things do is serve teachers and firefighters and others like that who are having trouble living here, or they might serve elderly folks, older Mainers. Westbrook's a town that's really aggressively tackled this issue, and I really commend them for what they've been doing. And I would look to them if you're a town trying to figure out how to get affordable housing on a fast track. They're a place to look. They're one of the places you can look. The other big part of what we do is we also, in addition to financing the production of units, we work around getting people into their first homes, and we sell bonds on Wall Street, and that we use that to pay for all of our financing operations. But a very important part of that is first home loans. And last year we made 918 mortgage loans worth more than $177 million to first-time home buyers in Maine. And I think that's a very important point to make, because I mean, everybody knows how difficult the market is right now. There's only like about 3,000 houses for sale anywhere in the state right now at this moment. And but we were able to get 900 people into their first home last year. And that's a pretty cool thing. And we do offer, a better rate than a commercial bank. We offer no points, and we offer down payment assistance. And I could talk about any of that later if anyone wanted to. But the other thing I would say is we do a lot of work around funding for emergency shelters. Your state, the 36 shelters in the state, we fund housing navigators who help people find housing, get into housing that exists. And we sort of subsidize the shelter system. The shelters are actually interesting because people don't realize they're all run by nonprofits, with the exception of one in Portland, which is run by the city. But they're all independent organizations. And so it's not like a state system. It's something that communities come up with, and we help to subsidize those. Finally, I would also add that we do housing stability services. We help people who are getting evicted with lawyers and representation through Pine Tree Legal. We help subsidize that. And we also, again, I think a really critical element in this really difficult market we're in is to have navigators available who can help people figure out how to get from either homelessness or insufficient housing into more permanent housing. And we've been working, there's been a really large homeless system redesign in the last couple of years that's helped try to coordinate all the different homelessness services that are happening around the state and draw them all together so people are pulling on the same oars as they go along. Finally, I'll just talk a little bit about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Maine has around 13,000 federal vouchers, which are distributed between our public housing authorities. And around a third of those are administered by Maine Housing, and the rest are associated with individual PHAs, public housing authorities. But those are also known as Section 8. And I think it's important to say about that is that, these aren't always easy to use. There's a significant wait list. And the problem really is that only the federal government is capable of providing the funding needed for this. It's just hugely expensive. Vouchers cost $7,000 or $8,000 a year per person, and that becomes a very, very expensive process. And so there's, people often wonder why the state can't provide vouchers, and I think the big issue there is just the cost. So that's, I could talk a lot about any of this stuff at length, but I'm going to stop there because I know I'm running out of time. But that's a little introduction to Maine Housing and the kinds of things we do. And I hope that built on what Tom said.
Thank you, Eric. No, it definitely did. And I too am working with the Housing Navigator program. Feels great to be able to get folks connected with landlords and actively working with landlords and providing incentives. We currently are working with someone in Berwick, getting 3 units ready for 3 different families and giving incentives to that landlord the day that that rental is available, which is great. Just getting through the inspection process right now, but shortly we'll have 3 households filled in Berwick, which is
that's
great.
awesome. I'll just say, I mean, that's really exciting. The voucher program is, you're signing up with the federal government to do a program, and there is some red tape involved. We try to minimize that, but it's hard. And so the landlord incentive program is really a great idea. I think that we got some funding from the legislature to work on that to help provide rather than a stick saying you're going to have to sign up with Section 8, a carrot to help people say, hey, this is a good program and it can help. And there are things like inspections that have to happen per the rules of that program. But I think the incentives are really important. So I'm really glad to hear that story.
No, it is going well, and hopefully within the next month, all 3 of those units will be filled up by families in need. I was going to ask briefly about your thoughts. One of the things that I also see that comes across, the number of asylum seekers right now also have kind of I'm not sure how to say it, but there's been a lot of asylum seekers in our communities coming through our communities right now, as we're also trying to house folks through the Section 8 voucher program. And I'm not sure if you could speak briefly about how that affects Maine housing right now.
Couple of things. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'd say the asylum seekers are a huge opportunity for Maine if we can figure out how to work with that population and get them on their feet, because I think we do need workers. We have one of the oldest populations in the country, if not the oldest. And so it's a really great opportunity, but they're coming in at a time when we've had this historic shortage of housing to begin with, which is a real problem. And that's causing a lot, and they aren't allowed to work right away. First, I think it's also really important to say that you can't, asylum seekers don't get vouchers. So it's very important for you to, I think, the audience to understand that these folks aren't coming in and taking away housing vouchers from people who have been waiting for them. You have to be citizens or legally, you've got to have status in order to get that. But I think it's really an issue, and we've been really working hard to, this last year, the legislature just put in almost $40 million, or a little over $40 million to work with emergency housing. A lot of that has been around asylum seekers. A lot of it's also been just in improving the shelter system, making that more robust. So I I'd just say it's a huge challenge for us right now. I mean, as I said earlier, the big problem right now is ever since the financial crisis of 2010, there's been a real underproduction of housing, which goes back before that too. But I think that's the most acute phase we're in now, started then. And I think the asylum seekers are coming into a place which was really crowded before. And so it's just a challenge. And we've been working a lot on converting hotels in some cases. We've been working on short-term housing, transitional housing, and trying all the time not to forget the fact that there are people here in the state who have been homeless also, and they have different needs. And we've got to make sure we reach all of those folks.
Thank you, Eric. Fantastic points. It shows the variety that we are dealing with as far as the options that are limited and the need that is wide, and the lack of programming actually to address the asylum seekers as we're also trying to work on our Section 8 program. So thank you for that history, and I'd love to have you back certainly to talk more about what Maine Housing is doing. I will now move on to Kendra Amaral. She's the town manager in Kittery, who's been actively working with Tom as well, and some other community members there on affordable housing for several years. Former assistant town manager as well of the town of Wilmington and deputy director of the city of Lowell. Thank you, Kendra, for joining us today. I appreciate your time and your expertise.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me. I think this sets up really nicely because Tom gives us that great global overview of what the crisis is. Eric has done a great job of explaining what's happening at the state level, and now I'm happy to share what we are trying to do at the community level to address affordable housing. So I am also going to share some slides. Let's see if this works. Are you seeing that as a presentation?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right, here we go. Okay, so again, thank you, Amber. I am the town manager for the town of Kittery. I am just one of many members of our community working on trying to address affordable housing here in our town. To kind of put a fine point on some of the things you've already heard today, the average home price in Kittery in the spring of this year was $539,000. That's a pretty expensive home. We started as part of our budget process reporting on what the average home value or home sale price is every spring to kind of bring a point to the fact that we're losing our economic diversity as a community. And it has grown by hundreds of thousands of dollars since I came in 2016 and started reporting it as part of my fiscal year budgets in 2018. So we know that this is an issue and we know that this is impacting our community. I also want to point on one thing before I get into the slides is that, Tom had touched on the fact of change. And so much of the sort of local and grassroots angst over addressing the housing crisis is about the change in community. And I think it's important to note that just as I just said about our housing values and Kittery's loss of economic diversity, we are already seeing change. Change is inevitable. It will happen no matter what, whether we address this crisis or we don't. Our communities are going to change. So it's about choosing the change you want and choosing going in the direction you want to go. So first things first, it's all about housing. Kittery is not only working on housing, but we're working on climate action plans. We're working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're working on economic development. And the interesting thing is that all three of those topics have a node in housing. So when we talk to our community about what they want to see for a climate resilient Kittery in 10 years, they talk about having more transit, having less development in our green spaces, having more redevelopment, and having housing. And you need housing in order to make those other things work. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community and what an inclusive community looks like in the future, people talk about seeing other people coming in, welcoming all kinds of people to our town and having them be a part of our fabric and a part of our community. Well, you can't do that if the majority of your housing is becoming more and more targeted to the affluent and to people who are unable to participate or be a part of the community because they don't have $500,000 to $1 million in order to buy housing or to rent. Economic development, we talk here about how much we love our Forsyth and our local businesses. We love Lil's and Anjou and Tulsi and Fishmonger and all these wonderful local places, and we don't want those to change. But when you talk to those businesses, they're the first ones to tell you that they're having a hard time managing their business, getting employees, and serving our community because the employees are not going to travel 45 minutes a day one way to get to a job in a service industry or in a low to mid income role. It's just not worth it. So all of these things, when you think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, helping your local businesses thrive, and being a more diverse and welcoming community, you can't do it without housing and without a broad range of housing that addresses all types of families and income needs. So it all comes together there. So some of the things that we are working on as strategies here in Kittery we've established a housing reserve fund. This is through both collaboration with our housing committee and our town council. So the housing committee develops these strategies and then brings them up to the town council, who reviews them and decides whether or not to implement. So the first one was a housing reserve fund. This was established in 2020. And what it is it's a fund where we park money to help grow affordable housing opportunities in the town. Primarily, the funds that are allocated to that are those that we get from the proceeds of sales of tax-acquired real estate. So we recently, I'd say in the last 3 years, had to take over property that had been abandoned and were in tax foreclosure for failure to pay taxes for many, many years. So I will tell you right off the bat, we did not evict a single person. These were all housing units that did not have someone living in it, but were in tax delinquency. So we took those properties, some of them we sold, and the proceeds from that went into the Housing Reserve Fund. And those monies are being used to now support additional generation of affordable housing. So that is a great place to start because it gives us some resources that we need to do our work. We've been working on inclusionary housing zoning. So that means requiring a certain number of units be affordable or mandated affordable. So meeting 80 or being eligible for people to rent or buy if they are 80% of area median income, 120% if you're buying. So our current zoning amendments require all projects of 5 or more units to have 10% of those units be affordable. And again, affordable for Kittery is defined as 80% of AMI, area median income. We have, over the course of the last 3 years, with the support of our planning board and our town council, have incorporated this inclusionary zoning in our commercial 1 and 3 zones. So that's the bypass and the Mall Road, Route 1 Mall Road, our business local and our business local 1 zones. So that is State Road heading down towards the Forsyth as well as the Post Office Square area. And also our conservation subdivisions. So any kind of land that's going to be subdivided to have smaller lots and a more dense arrangement, they're required to be to have 10% affordable. So that is now the law of the land for the town of Kittery. We are looking at expanding those to other zones as well. We do a couple of zones a year and let the dust settle a bit, and then start looking at our next set of zones. And to give you a sense of the kind of timeline that it takes to see production from what we do, we got the C1 zone to have inclusionary housing and allow housing in that zone in 2020, and a project has just come forward to the planning board in the last couple of months. That is a mixed use development that does have housing. I think it's 100 units. Some of the other things that we've done, we reduced barriers to accessory dwelling unit generation, ADUs. Our actual ordinance language was one of the models used by the state when it adopted statewide ADU law as part of LD 2003. And what we did through our zoning change was we revised our zoning to make ADUs allowed in all zones and to reduce the barriers and the requirements to have an accessory dwelling unit. So before, Kittery actually had put a cap on it. We were trying to prevent people from creating accessory dwelling units. Our council allowed us to do a shift in how we approach them, and now we're encouraging them. And so with our ADUs allowed in all zones, we have reduced minimum square feet for the actual dwelling units, and we removed some of the restrictive setbacks that were making it challenging for someone to build an ADU, either an accessory attached to the primary or a separate structure on the lot for accessory dwelling units. And so what does that produce? So prior to it, we had 17 accessory dwelling units in Kittery prior to adopting the zoning. And the last 2 years, that's grown to 40. So we're seeing that generation in accessory dwelling units just by removing some of the barriers. We went a step further in 2022 with our accessory dwelling units, and through support of the council, allocated $150,000 of our ARPA funds to a pilot grant program that is actually paying grantees up to $50,000 to create an ADU on their property. Now, there's a carrot and a stick to this. So the carrot is we're providing the funding to help make this happen. The stick is that they are required to lease that ADU to an income qualified tenant or tenants over the course of 10 years. And that income qualification, again, is 80% of AMI. So what we get out of it is affordable units. They can't use them as short-term rentals. And what they get out of it is some seed funding to help make it happen. The first of our grantees should be done the end of this construction season with the creation of their ADU, and should have at least, I would say, by this fall. We've got another one that's kicking off their process of getting their permitting in place. So we're using this as a pilot to see how successful it is. If it does end up generating good good accessory dwelling units that do meet that affordable need, then I can imagine us using that housing reserve fund to continue that grant program going forward. Finally, we're allocating tax acquired properties to actual affordable unit generation. So 2 of the properties that we ended up taking in the last couple of years for delinquent taxes, we have surplused in a way that they can only be used as new affordable units. So the first, as an example, is 4244 Old Post Road. This is currently a single family unit on it's 2 parcels. They were co-owned, single family on one, and then old bus depot garage on the other. We put that out for an RFP. Fairtide was awarded the contract, and they're going to be developing approximately 6 affordable units on this site. And we're working collaboratively with them on that because we know it's expensive to build housing. We know expensive to build anything in this area, but it's expensive to build housing. So what we're doing is a sort of hand-in-hand approach where we are going to do everything we can to access as many grants and financial support as possible as the municipal owner of the property, and then we're going to turn it over to Fairtide so that they could pick up and run with it the rest of the way. So that means we are working with Southern Maine Planning and Development Corporation on getting brownfields funding to help take down the structures, because they have, you know, things that you would expect in an older home. They've got some lead paint, they've got some asbestos in the, you know, and the adhesive on the flooring and things like that. So that's costly to take down. So we're working on getting grants to make sure that we can cover those costs, and that way Fairtide can focus on building for the affordable units. And then we also have a project on Phelps Ave. Again, this was an abandoned duplex that had been unoccupied for, I think, 4 or 5 years. We are surplusing that. Expect this fall it will go back on the market, and the buyer will have to commit through deed restrictions and otherwise that they are going to rehab those units, and they will be affordable restricted for the next 20 years. So they either have to be sold or leased to someone who qualifies as affordable. So as you can see from these strategies, we're trying to tack this from all kinds of different ways. We're doing it as a small community. You know, we don't have a housing department here. We don't have a housing authority. This is really all being done through our volunteer housing committee and our council and our planning staff and administration staff of just really trying to work our way through this and find a good path forward. Despite all these great things, I'm not going to tell you that everything's been rosy or that the community has been overwhelmingly supportive of everything we've done. That's not been the case. As you know, we anticipated when we started this work, everybody says they're for affordable housing until a project shows up in your community, and then everybody meant the other community, not here. And so we've been struggling with that and trying to figure out what do we do to grow the understanding, the acceptance, and the support for housing within our community? So one of the key things that we're working on this year is education. And being a part of this and working with Amber on her program is one of them. We launched Books and Big Ideas Community Read. We did 3 books, 2 of which we had the authors in to talk, fiction, nonfiction, and a children's book. And it's about housing and the importance of home. We're doing a photo essay on multifamily housing in Kittery to kind of kill that stigma of multifamily housing is ugly and out of character, because it actually does exist here. People don't realize it's there though. So we're going to try and highlight all the wonderful multifamily housing we already have in the community. We're working on in a word testimonials. So this is talking to and getting quotes from our business owners, from our residents, from our committee members, and from other people that come through this community, like shipyard workers, about what it would mean to them to have affordable housing in this community. What does it mean to the owner of a local shop in the Foreside to have affordable housing available to their staff so that they can live and be a part of their organization? What does it mean for shipyard workers who are having to commute 40 to 45 minutes to work each day and are adding congestion to our roads, are adding greenhouse gas emissions to our roads, are sitting in traffic? What does it mean to, we actually have a counselor who's a renter. What would it mean to him to have greater access to affordable housing? So we're working on that and trying to get that out. It's actually not unlike what Maine Housing was starting to do with its NIMBY program of, you see a picture of a firefighter that says, I'm good enough to keep you safe, but not to live in your community, or a picture of a teacher, I'm a good enough person to teach your kids, but apparently not to live in your community. So doing that, but trying to put a little more positive spin on it. We're working with Amber and York Community Service Association on the Housing Solutions for All. We're going to be helping to cross promote the information about the landlord training and landlord incentives, which I think is really important. I think a lot of folks don't know what they could do with their property and being landlords and contributing to the affordable housing issues. We're also working on, for the fall, helping people in a very visual, very digestible way, understanding what zoning and housing types are allowed in Kittery. And we're doing that in the fall because LD 2003 is going to change some of what's allowed here. So we want to make sure we've got that implemented before we go too far, because then people might get confused once 2003 really goes into full effect. So we're going to help do that through visuals and very digestible talking points, rather than sort of policy wonks and planning nerds who, talk zoning in 300 pages as opposed to 3 bullets. And then we're also just having community conversations. We're trying to talk to people one-on-one and help them understand how all of those things, that sort of Venn diagram I showed earlier, how those all come together and do node at housing. So that is a summary of what we're working on. We've got a lot more information available on our website. If you go to kitteryme.gov under Kittery Housing Committee, we've got links to all kinds of information. We've got videos from presentations we've done and information about a lot of the programs that we have going on. And we're always excited to share our ideas and to hear what other people are doing so that we can continue to push this issue forward and get to a point where we are a community that welcomes all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. That was phenomenal. I really appreciate the breakdown too on what you guys have done, your timeline over the last several years. And we are running out of time here shortly, so I wanted to jump to DeCarlo Brown. He is assistant planner, land use planner here in York. So we're going to give him a minute to talk a little bit about the housing crisis and what we're doing here in York. And certainly this is recorded and will be shared with everybody who's attended and wasn't able to attend. We'll be doing the same again through September. And at the end, I'll follow with a flyer for our upcoming topic in July. How to create that rental unit. DeCarlo, welcome.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So hi, I'm DeCarlo Brown. Official title is actually town planner here at the town of York. And just to chime in and to reiterate a lot of what we've already heard this evening, this afternoon, because we're short on time. Affordable housing is an issue. It is a market issue that should be addressed and can't be addressed without public investment. It just cannot happen. After World War II, what we did is we built a lot of homes, we built communities, a lot of which that provided housing at an affordable rate for those that were returning from the war. And you know, in some instance, we're trying to address a bigger problem on the local area without that larger amount of investment that's coming down from federal and from the state level. We're doing the best that we can. The way I see it is that we do so by reducing the barriers to building housing, but not being naive about how the market operates. And I'll say that especially for the town of York, our average housing and median housing price is $900,000. So no public employee is going to be able to afford a house that's in the town if the average cost is $900,000. It's just a fact. And you would have to make an astronomical amount of money in order to afford that. And so because there's a gap in the market, you have to start filling those gaps with, basically some things that can be done at the policy level. That's strengthening basically any incentives that you have for workforce affordable housing. We have an overlay in here in the town of York that covers actually the entire area of our growth area. And so you have a bonus, a density bonus, whenever you're going to be you are adding workforce affordable housing. And for LD 2003, that actually helped us because in doing the math from base density plus the 2.5 times base density, we've been offering more than that bonus for a long time. And that's why some of the developments that we've had in York have been able to go forward. We have some units coming online in multiple places right now. We have for workforce housing, which is finishing up. And then we also have York Housing Authority has built 2 buildings that are seeking to go online as well. We also have inclusionary zoning. So it's built into the market. So when our people are subdividing, they have to provide some percentage of affordable housing. Amber knows this because she used to work with us. Other than that, it really does have to have fill the gaps. And I'll say that because myself, I am the beneficiary of affordable housing in growing up, and I've witnessed that. And so you have an official program for affordable housing, and then you're going to have to offer some type of market affordable rate for people to transition from that assistance program to a rate that they can pay themselves, and then an entry rate to get on to basically the housing scale, some type of buying. Without that ramp, you enter a gap, and that gap shows up in multiple places, especially when you're talking about a high cost of living areas. And it's baked into the federal definitions of affordability because they cap it at a federal level. You'll see when you're in a group area for a place, you'll have that if you're outside of that area, your income and that percentage works against you because you're taking into account the more affordable areas and the highest area in that whole grouping. And what that does is that if you're somewhere like town of York, the books will say that you are able to get affordable housing, but that doesn't actually exist in your township. You'll have to go to a different town to get that affordable rate because it brings down your AMI. So what you're seeing is that and geographically, you're seeing people in-migrate in the same places from places like York because they can no longer afford it, or Kittery. They're going to places like a Sanford or Somersworth in New Hampshire or Rochester in New Hampshire because those areas are bringing them to those because that's where they're finding those affordable rates to get onto the scale. I also just want to, because I'm running out of town, I just want everyone to be aware of basically not only the public investment is that, your towns themselves have to be able to, to provide that source of income for the people who work there. Just like we said before, is that, there's two parts of the affordable housing. There's the cost of housing and the cost and the amount of money that people are making. And that's why people from Boston can come up here and afford places, because they're making that income. And so you have to have those income opportunities in your communities that can afford for people to live where they work. I commute from Sanford because of the affordable housing crisis, because that's where the affordable housing, and not even official affordable housing, but housing that is affordable, is located. And then I can then go to work. And then on the other side of that is you have your policy side. People need to speak up. There's only so much that the activists and policy leaders can do without that level of public support. And so we're talking about the comprehensive plans, we're talking about the zoning ordinances, we're talking about all of it, because if we continue to see only a small amount of public engagement from the public on these items, then those voices that are a minority are going to be they're going to be amplified. And sometimes that works for you because you have an activist who's working with you, but a lot of times that works against you. And if you are in a place that you have a population of, 20,000 people, and only 1,500 people show up to vote, then those 1,500 people are going to decide where your town goes and where your county goes and city goes. And so a large part of this is getting people involved and keeping them involved. And so having the hook and making sure after they're hooked to make sure that they stay involved and they stay educated about what's going on. And that has to do with design. I also went to the CNU this year as well. That's where I met Thomas. And it's showing people that what you're thinking is a higher density place. It's not necessarily what you actually mean. And in a lot of our communities, we have this missing middle already baked in. It has been there for years and decades. But when they're hearing this one topic, they're not equating that with the missing middle. They're not equating that with this home that's been 3,000 square foot and then has been separated into units, into a fourplex or 6 units or 7 units. They're equating that to a brand new building that they have seen in some type of news article or somewhere, and saying that is that's coming into our community. And so a design goes a long way to build community support. And you know your communities, and because you live there, you work there, you're part of what they talk about every day. And so it's really bringing in the conversation of, this is not a new topic. It's keeping what has made your town great already, and letting people know the dangers of that. Of this is the risk if we do nothing. In science is, if you do nothing, what will the result be? And letting people know, this is what we're seeing as a trend right now. And are you prepared to lose this? And if you're not prepared to lose this, then you need to act, and putting that action back on in your communities and giving them some way to act. And so that it's a multi-part about that. I could talk about this all day, but we do not have enough time. I know we are, and I got the short end of the stick. So I'm going to return that back over to Amber. Thank you.
Thank you, DeCarlo. Phenomenal. I appreciate you jumping in the short time that you had, and I will be having you back to speak on this topic again, because I know you've got a lot more to say, particularly when it comes to York. But I think you and Kendra just hit it on the head when you said, be a part of the change. And that's really what we're asking folks to do, is continue these conversations, have them with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues, keep discussing the importance of housing for all. And let's keep this dialogue going. And I will be sharing the link as well to this webinar through our libraries, as well as the public access channels with the local communities. And I believe Sophie is going to post the flyer here in a second for how to create our rental units, which will be July 19th from 12 to 1. And again, I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today, Tom, Kendra, Eric, and DeCarlo. Really appreciate your expertise. You really were able to take a huge topic and bring it to something we can digest on a local level, and appreciate the optimism too you brought to a challenging subject. So thank you all very much for your time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.